Hello, and welcome to And the Runner-Up Is. This week on the show, we'll travel back in time to the 31st Academy Awards, which awarded the films of 1958. Stanley Kramer arrived with a socially relevant commentary on racial tension through the lens of a gritty crime drama, The Defiant Ones, starring Tony Curtis and Sidney Poitier. The film earned a strong reception and 9 Oscar nominations, including Best Picture and 4 for acting, and it went on to win 2 for Best Original Screenplay and Best Cinematography. But it was the Vincent Minnelli musical Gigi that wound up victorious, not only winning Best Picture, but all 9 of the categories it was nominated for. So why did The Defiant Ones come up short? We'll explore all this and more as we discuss how the Oscar almost went to The Defiant Ones. Hello and welcome back to And the Runner-Up Is. I'm your host, Kevin Jacobson, here on the season finale of this round of And the Runner-Up Is. I am going to be taking about a month-long break just to give myself some time to be a person. I'm very excited for this to be our final episode of this round, 1958, talking about The Defiant Ones, and here to talk with me about it is a guy you first heard join me for Born on the 4th of July and the films of 1989, and you also heard him on some bonus coverage for On Second Thought talking about Get Out. So please welcome back to the show from Next Best Picture, Josh Parham.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me back. I am very much looking forward to this discussion.
Yes, me too. We're 30 years before your first talk, so we're just all over the place.
Oh yeah, well, it's always great to be back.
Yes, always a pleasure. So today we are talking about The Defiant Ones, which was the runner-up, I am saying, to Gigi, a very different kind of film. And so let's get into a summary of The Defiant Ones. It is a crime drama about a pair of prisoners, one black, one white, who are chained together and being transported by truck. And the truck kind of swerves and crashes over an embankment, and the 2 prisoners manage to escape amid the chaos. And so we get to know the 2 of them, Cullen and Joker, as they run for their lives and try to evade capture as the sheriff and his posse are going out looking for them. And along the way, we see Cullen and Joker try to break into a general store, only to be discovered by some inhabitants of the town, and eventually they seek shelter at a woman's house, and she starts to fall in love with Joker, causing some very interesting problems. And the whole film is really kind of about the relationship between these 2 guys and how it evolves from hatred to genuine friendship. So the film was directed by Stanley Kramer and written by Harold Jacob Smith and Nedrick Young. It stars Sidney Poitier as Cullen, Tony Curtis as Joker, Theodore Bikel, Charles McGraw, Lon Chaney Jr., and Cara Williams. And The Defiant Ones made $2.5 million at the box office and was nominated for 9 Academy Awards, winning 2, but not Best Picture. Okay, so The Defiant Ones. Let's talk about it, Josh. What are your thoughts on this film?
Well, I would want to say first that I came across this movie many, many years ago, and at the time, I remember really loving it. Like, it was one of the best films I'd ever seen. It was incredible, and I just absolutely thought it was amazing.
Wow.
Well, many years have gone by since I first saw it, and I revisited it for our discussion, and yeah, my feelings on it have definitely shifted. I don't really feel like it is as masterful as I used to think it is, or I used to think that it was. I really do feel like the movie very much has a dated sensibility in terms of the story that it's working with and a lot of the themes that it wants to explore. And I think because of that, it didn't really have the same level of engagement for me. But I do think that the performances are really strong. I think that the way that this movie has this very gritty, kind of down to earth style to it works very well for the sensibilities of the film. And I also think that even given the very dated nature of what the film wants to explore, they're not very revolutionary anymore, but I find it still to be an interesting kind of look into where the time period was at that particular moment. So I don't think it is a great movie. It's very flawed in a lot of aspects, but I do admire enough of it to still say that I kind of like the film.
Yeah. So this is a film that I had not seen before. It was one of these classics that I had just not watched until now, and I was kind of just saving it for this because I knew I'd be talking about it. But I love Sidney Poitier. I generally love Tony Curtis as well, and it's definitely a very intriguing, sort of simple plot. But I was nervous to see how it would treat certain aspects of race, considering it's a film from the 1950s, and I wasn't sure if it would be either problematic or too preachy. Like, I didn't know which kind of problem it might have. And on the surface, I think you can definitely see that it's very dated in some aspects, in terms of definitely being a very clear message about two people of different backgrounds who dislike each other at first, but then of course they find they have more things in common than they thought. And we've seen this over and over again, even to the point of last year's Best Picture winner Green Book. So
yes, you get a lot of Green Book vibes from this movie, it has to be said.
I know. But for me, watching the Defiant Ones, I was definitely taken with how often it just manages to demonstrate just how the two of them evolve in their relationship rather than it feeling too contrived. I think it comes to a point where their circumstances mean that they have to rely on each other to survive, and when you're in these situations of hurtling down a river or trying to climb your way out of a hole in the pouring rain, you know, all of the prejudice and the preconceived notions and everything tend to fly out the window, and it just becomes about you and another human being trying to survive. And so, sort of on that note, I think the action sequences in this film are really strong, especially for 1958. Very tense, very visceral, and you feel what they're going through, I think, in all the downpours and the mud and the way that they have to maneuver their bodies in these uncomfortable ways because they're still chained together. So I found myself kind of invested in that aspect of it, of just being gripped by sort of how they were going to manage to progress to the next point and still try to evade capture. You know what I mean?
And I think a lot of that has to do with those performances from Poitier and Curtis, because this movie really centers them even in those action scenes. You don't really even get a sense that they're reliant on stunt doubles a whole lot, which apparently they weren't. They were front and center for a lot of the action in it. And I think that having them be so front and center gives you a greater emotional connection to those characters. And I also think that you're right in this idea that we have seen a lot of stories about, you know, two people that are very different coming together and evolving as the story goes on. And sometimes we have a habit of accepting those kinds of stories more than others, even including last year's Best Picture winner. But I think where this movie does have an advantage is that these are two characters that are physically bonded to each other. And it allows the story to kind of have this out of saying, well, you kind of have to evolve, otherwise you're just literally will not survive the situation.
Yeah.
And I think that concept helps to drive the messages of the film, even though they are very simplistic. The ideas that we got to work together, it's not revolutionary at all, certainly not now, 60 years later, but I think that it helps at least ground the film in some kind of realism that you can accept those ideas within the film.
Mm-hmm. And diving a little more into these performances, I think that both Curtis and Poitier do a really wonderful job of just capturing these two men who are in the same situation but are very different people at the same time. like how Curtis as Joker is more quiet, and I think he has this sort of philosophy about him of keeping quiet like the animals do in order to survive. And then Poitier as Cullen, he's a little more gregarious. He likes to sing out, and he has kind of more of a boldness to him, even though he has suffered a lot of abuse in his life. So very interestingly drawn characters.
And both of them really are able to sell the idea that they do, even though they are men that are both chained together, that they're both criminals and trying to run to something very similar goals, that they do come from very different backgrounds. And, it's a movie from 1958, so I don't think it gets into all the nuances that it could with even two criminals that are from, that one is white and one is black. But I think for the time, it does showcase that these are two people that do experience the world very differently. And both of them are challenged on those perspectives. And even though it comes from a dated kind of point of view, I still find it for the time to be very interesting that they were able to show that. And I think that you really see that through both of their performances as well. They're really well suited to these characters, and they're a big reason why the film works at all.
Absolutely. Yeah. And going back to what you were saying with some of the more physical stuff that they're doing, that also helps you to connect with it very much, because I feel like, seeing those big close-ups of the two of them in the pouring rain, I feel like it makes you even more invested in it. Even it made me step back a little bit and be like, wow, like these two great actors are really just going for it physically and emotionally. So
yeah, there's this really great sense of like grittiness to the filmmaking that really puts you in with these characters, and it has a bit of the kind of sheen to it because you can't help it because it's a movie from this era, but it does feel like a bit of a departure from like the big studio epics that we usually got to see during this time. It really does feel like there was an effort to put you with these guys, get yourself kind of down in the muck with them to help sell the idea that you're kind of traveling with them and help to establish that emotional connection with their character arcs as well.
Definitely. And I think also the cinematography, the fact that it is black and white, I think there's no other way they could have shot this and made it feel so timeless in some ways. I know we've been talking about how in certain aspects it's dated, but I just feel like looking at this now, I don't think seeing this story told in color would have done it any favors compared to what we see here.
That's always interesting, and it's always one of the things that I find so fascinating about black and white is that when you shoot a film that way, you are taking away so many other tools that you usually have in making a movie, and it really refocuses your attention, and a lot of that attention gets focused on making sure that your story is really good. And even though there are some aspects of it, as we said, have not aged as best as they could, it's still, I think that black and white cinematography allows the film to at least strip away most of its bells and whistles and really focus in on the journey that these two go through. And while you might be able to argue its effectiveness, I think it still communicates that pretty clearly, and a lot of the filmmaking choices that they made help in that, certainly.
Yeah. Do you have like a favorite sequence, or I almost want to call them like episodes almost, because of how it really moves from one set piece to another?
Well, I think the one that really sticks in my mind is when they are caught in that town after they break into the general store, and they're really about to be lynched. And it's really like the one moment that the film kind of comes the closest to talking about these very interesting themes in a very blunt way, which it doesn't really go into throughout much of it. And again, it could do it with a little bit more nuance, but the fact that you do have a scene where, that Cullen recognizes that the imminent danger that's about to happen, and Joker just doesn't register for him in that immediate moment. And I find that to be interesting that this film would present that, to actually show that I don't think the film really showcases the racial implications of lynching, but the notion that one character at least has an idea of what it means and the other one has no comprehension that it could even possibly happen to him,
Mm-hmm.
I find, especially for 1958, to be a really interesting exploration that the film decides to go into.
Yeah, definitely. And this is where we also meet the character of Sam, who is this. We later learn that he used to be on the chain gang as a prisoner, and that is part of why he is so forgiving of their situation. But I really am fascinated by that character as well. And Lon Chaney Jr., his performance, I think, should have been worthy of Oscar consideration, because that's a very complicated role in a very limited amount of screen time that he is asked to give, and I think he provides a lot of really interesting gravitas.
And a very big departure from what people would normally know Lon Chaney Jr. from.
Yeah.
It's not the Wolfman at all, and it is a very interesting character that he has to play in those scenes. And you're right, it's very fascinating. It's very brief. It doesn't get a whole lot of exploration, but I think he makes the most of his screen time, and he really provides us with a character that is more complicated than we would give credit to. And I don't know, there's also a part of me that likes that we don't get that much exploration, that he is just this kind of enigma that just shows up and then is just gone very quickly. And I sort of like the mystery to that character and how it lingers throughout the rest of the film.
Yeah, very intriguing. Well, speaking of some of the supporting cast, let's talk about this third act sequence here.
Yeah,
where we have
let's talk about that.
this young boy who stumbles upon them. He brings them back to his house where his mother is, and this character of Cara Williams is literally just credited as Billy's mother. Doesn't even get a name, but it's fine. Whatever, we'll move past that. And she is quite interesting. She is super horny. She's liking what she sees with Tony Curtis, and I mean, I don't blame her.
I can't blame her.
Yeah,
all that.
exactly. Yeah, like I get it. As it went on, I was definitely waiting for the other shoe to drop here, because I definitely feel like the pace slows down considerably, and the way she's acting around the two of them and Joker is a bit disconcerting and obsessive. So when there is a turn at the end, I wasn't totally surprised, but at the same time, I was also like, damn, like this woman's about to abandon her child and leave another man to die just to be with this guy she just met.
Yeah.
What is this character?
Hasn't even known him like a full day and is ready to
Risk
dramatically change her life. Yeah. This section of the movie, I'm a bit mixed on, because I do think all of the performances in this section are still really strong.
Yeah.
But it is this very weird feeling you get where suddenly we're introduced to this new character who just seems like her only characteristic is that she is smitten by Tony Curtis. And like we said, when he takes his shirt off, you can certainly understand it.
Yeah.
But
It
just seems like a very weird development within the story, and it happens very quickly. And I just feel like a sense of incongruity in terms of like tone almost, and it becomes much more romantic, and it just really doesn't feel like it's right for this particular film, unfortunately. It's not really the actor's fault, but the way that the story just keeps going in that direction just didn't really seem to fit what came before it.
Yeah, it definitely feels like a change of pace that I wasn't ready for. And it did feel like it suddenly became like a romantic film from the 1950s in a way that felt, I would argue, even more dated than what we've come to have before. So
yeah, the romantic interplay between the two of them, if you could call it that, certainly seems very much of its time. And it's also unfortunate that because of the development of the story in that direction, it really limits what Cullen has to do, with what Sidney Poitier contributes to that story. He literally is just asleep at a table throughout most of that section. And it's a shame, because obviously that character has so much more interesting things going on with him and can contribute so much to that story. And it really does feel like they sidelined him for this romance subplot that just is not as interesting as the rest of the film.
Yeah, And I almost thought the fact that he was absent for so long meant that he had maybe just escaped in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
And was just like, that was going to be the big twist. Like, oh, where'd he go? But alas, he just stuck around and had to, whatever. The ending is really quite interesting. But before we get into that, I want to talk about the other aspect of the film, which is we get a lot of cutbacks to the sheriff and the posse, and they're chasing after them. So what did you make of the repeated scenes we got from that?
I enjoyed these moments, even though I don't know how much they really added to it. I always feel like when you get scenes like this, it's really only there to set up a sense of momentum within the story, to kind of provide a ticking clock so that it doesn't seem like we're just aimlessly with these characters, and that, you know, if we have a sense that people are chasing them, then it gives us some kind of reference as to an endpoint, at least that somebody has. And I understand why it's in the story, and I think that many of those performances are very charming. I know there's this like running gag with this guy in the radio that's kind of fun. Mm-hmm. But I also think overall it didn't really add a ton thematically to me. Outside of it just being like a kind of fun sequence every once in a while, it was just sort of serviceable to me.
Yeah, they're kind of there to just break some of the tension and break up some of the scenes and progress time in a way, I think. So they're mildly amusing. I mean, I kind of do enjoy Theodore Bickel's performance as the Southern sheriff, and I was kind of amused by some of his mannerisms and such, and the weird thing with the dogs is kind of fun, but certainly not the kind of thing you walk away from this film necessarily remembering, which is why I'm slightly surprised that Theodore was nominated.
Yeah, and like you said, they're not bad scenes, but they're just very uninspiring. And I think it would have been very interesting to see this film where you did just stay with the two escaped convicts. And yes, you wouldn't have had this progression of time that you can more crystallize with the sheriff and the party that's tracking them down. But I also think that would have been far more interesting, that we would have just been in the entire perspective of these guys, and they don't know where the law is and catching up to them. They have no idea. They are just moving as forward as fast as they can as well. And I think that would have been a very interesting perspective to stick with for the film.
Rather than being too omniscient with everything. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. The ending we should talk about, because it's rather famous and also in some cases infamous because of certain choices that are made.
Yes, yeah.
So as it ends, this is a 61-year-old movie, so I'm going to spoil it. Sorry. It's only an hour and a half on Amazon, so you can pause it and come back to it and make...
Yes, it is mercifully short.
It is quite short.
I am so glad that this was like a 90-minute movie.
Yes, exactly. Because there's a lot of epics in this general era, so regardless... Yeah. So the way this ends is that, as I alluded to earlier, Billy's mother makes an interesting choice as far as she wants to run away with Joker after only knowing him for about 18 hours or so. And she basically sends Cullen off through the swamps because she knows the lay of the land, and so they trust her advice. And turns out he's basically going to die there. And she makes it very clear that she wants him to not be able to say anything if he gets caught and all of that. So Joker's very upset by that, because why should he, be taking the side of this woman he just met over this person who he had this incredible bonding experience with. So goes after him, of course, and Billy shoots him, does not die, but he shoots him, almost mortally wounding him, and goes to Cullen to warn him. They hear of a train coming to maybe escape on, and of course Joker is quite hurt, and so he's not really keeping up as far as running, and Cullen manages to get on the train. He extends out his hand to the Joker, excuse me, to Joker. That would have been interesting. Turns out he can't reach it, and so rather than go off alone, Cullen decides to jump off the train, and the two of them know that the sheriff and everyone is coming for them, and the film basically ends with the two of them sort of arm in arm, just bonded together, knowing that there's this impending doom. Okay, so this ending, some people really love, some people really feel like doesn't make any sense. What is your take on this?
Well, it is very hard to kind of comprehend the idea that Sidney Poitier is on the train and just wanting to root for him to keep going. I mean,
Yeah.
I think especially when you consider our modern sensibilities, that even though Tony Curtis's character Joker has made this evolution, he still probably deep within him is a very resentful character. And I think because of that, we certainly do want to, we want to root for Sidney Poitier as much as we can. And there's a part of me that does feel it is a bit contrived, certainly. But I also think that for the time, I understand that's where they wanted to go with it. I don't have a huge problem with it. It does sort of seem like the natural conclusion, especially with where the story goes in the third act, that it kind of feels like it should end up there. Anything that would be more quote-unquote realistic would almost be not right for the tone that the film is going into. So, yeah, it's not perfect. I would certainly root for something else to happen, but for what the movie is, I think it works fine.
Yeah, I definitely have mixed feelings about it because I don't want to necessarily fault a film all of these years later for making a choice kind of considering all the context of the time. But I definitely understand some of the criticisms that it's not quite realistic. And I don't know if you had known about this, but James Baldwin famously didn't love this ending.
Yeah, I remember hearing something about that, yeah.
Yeah, there's also a point of this in the documentary I Am Not Your Negro, where they talk about this. And I actually wrote down his quote about the ending because I think it's an interesting perspective. And he says, when Sidney jumps off the train, the white liberal people downtown were much relieved and joyful, but when black people saw him jump off a train, they yelled, "Get back on the train, you fool." The black man jumps off the train in order to reassure people, to make them know they are not hated. Though they have made human errors, they have done nothing for which to be hated. And I think there's some truth in that. I think the ending is powerful, and certainly in what it says about friendship and forgiveness and all that. But for me, it actually didn't quite fit with sort of the grittiness of what had come before. And if I were to just have the power to rewrite this ending, I would probably do something like, Cullen staying on the train, maybe beforehand they have this exchange or something that, Joker is not going to make it. They both know that, so he just tells Cullen to go on without him. And it sort of keeps that bittersweet ending feeling to it, but while also being a bit more realistic. But don't get me wrong, I do think that the image of, a white man in the arms of a black man at the end of the film is a good statement for the time and quite powerful, but it can also kind of come off as a bit absolving of Joker and the white audience who's watching it in terms of their own racism by putting a lot of the responsibility on the black man to change and to forgive the white man, while the white man, yes, he goes to help him out in the swamp, but I also feel like that's kind of what any decent human being would do for their friend, and I don't know how much credit I would give for that, if that makes sense. Yeah, so I'm very conflicted about this.
Yeah, at the end of this film, I don't think that Joker is this wholly transformed person. I think the film kind of wants us to believe that to a certain extent, but I still find him to be a character that is still holding a lot of prejudices, and probably those prejudices go away for Cullen in this one specific example because he is bonded with him, but I don't find him to be a completely absolved character, and I think that this ending does give you the implication that he should be, and that that Sidney Poitier, essentially the actor that you're looking at, and certainly as somebody who was so important to the African American community, especially at that time, it does have those implications. But I also think that as much as that ending is unrealistic, you could also make an argument that the entire premise of the film is. And I
Yeah.
also, because I also remember, speaking of people who made comments about the film, one of the people they offered the role of Joker to was Robert Mitchum.
Mm-hmm.
And Robert Mitchum turned that role down, and for a long time, people thought it was because he didn't want to just be in the movie altogether. But his point was, as somebody who actually was on the chain gang, that it was unrealistic at that time that a white man and a black man would be chained together. So you could
Mm-hmm.
also make an argument that the entire premise of this movie is already a fantasy that is constructed for this very forced idea of friendship and getting to know one another and becoming better people. And I think that it's one of those things where you sort of have to buy into the film or you don't. And while there are elements to it that make it a bit harder for you to get into, I think that if you take it as a whole, and especially at the time, there's enough in there that I think is effective enough for me to accept it.
Right. And speaking to sort of the premise as a whole, they do say at one point in the film that when someone's like, "How did these two get stuck together?" They kind of pass it off by saying, "Oh, the warden had a sense of humor about him."
Yeah, it's a
So
one-off joke that they
yeah,
mention, and that is supposed to be their way of explaining it. But that's not a very light decision that you would do either. And it
right.
is another moment of the film bypassing more complexity, more nuance in its storytelling in favor of something that is just like, there it is. We've explained it very briefly, and we're just going to move on, just focusing on the journey that these characters go through. And I think if you tackle the film based really just looking at that perspective for it, that's where it's going to be the most effective.
Yeah, I think on the whole, I'm definitely very positive about the film, even with some of the flaws we've pointed out and some of the storytelling changes we might make. But yeah, I think it's very powerfully acted. It's really well shot, especially for the time, like I said, and really does a lot with the 90 minutes that there is of screen time that just packs a really kind of epic story into a very small scale, what it seemed like to be kind of a small scale sort of production in some ways.
Yeah, as much as we can lament on it not going into more complex territory, it is a movie that understands how to effectively use its time.
Yeah,
And I'm very appreciative of that.
exactly.
Yeah, I'm very appreciative of a movie that does not overstay its welcome. And this is a film that understands where it needs to go, even when I don't always love where it's going. I understand why it is going in those directions, and it uses its time very effectively, and that is really to be commended for the storytelling.
Yeah, definitely. I really respect it on that level. It's just, you know, there are some tinkerings we could do, but that is to be expected in some ways. But
Yeah.
any stray observations before we move on to the Oscars?
Um, no, I think that pretty much kind of sums up my ideas. As we've said, there are some dated things about it, and it carries a perspective that is not the most revolutionary and certainly is simplified much more than it probably should be. But I think it is a film that has enough good things going for it in terms of its performances, in terms of its filmmaking, and even in terms of the intentions behind the story, that it is still a really, as you said, a powerful piece of work.
Yeah,
And I think a lot of that does help to overcome many of the shortcomings that we find in it today.
yeah. And much like many Stanley Kramer films, which I've talked about quite a few of them by now, it is very well intentioned.
Yes.
And you can make whatever you want from that, the good or the bad.
Absolutely.
So, when we come back, we will be discussing why the Defiant Ones lost Best Picture to Gigi.
Go on, tell me all that big talk about Johnny Potatoes when the chain's off and nobody chasing you. Come on. You can't, can you? You can't because you're nothing. You're not even a man. You're a monkey on a stick. That cracker mob back there, they pulled the string and you jumped. I'm a strange colored man in a white South town. How long you think before they pick me up?
Get off my back. I ain't married to you. Now, what do I care? Come on.
You married to me, all right, Joker. And here's the ring. But I ain't going south on no honeymoon now. We going north. Time's gonna come, Joker. The time's gonna come. Go on! Burn their eyes out!
Can't go lynching me. I'm a white man.
I'll tell you what kind of white man you are.
And I'll be Charlie Potatoes. Charlie Potatoes coming down the street.
No more yasser.
Oh, it's been so long.
It's real now.
Don't go away.
I ain't going anywhere.
Don't go away.
Come on!
I can't make it. I can't make it.
And we're back. So now we'll be discussing why The Defiant Ones lost Best Picture to Gigi. The Defiant Ones was nominated for 9 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Director for Stanley Kramer, Best Actor for Tony Curtis, Best Actor for Sidney Poitier, Best Supporting Actor for Theodore Bikel, Best Supporting Actress for Cara Williams, Best Original Screenplay, Best Cinematography, Black and White, and Best Film Editing. And it won Best Original Screenplay and Best Cinematography. So before the Oscars, the Defiant Ones won the Golden Globe for Best Drama. It won the New York Film Critics Best Picture Prize, and it won at the Writers Guild. Meanwhile, we had Gigi, which won the Golden Globe for musical, and the DGA and the WGA for a category that no longer exists called Best American Musical. So I wish we'd bring that back. So let's talk about why Gigi, which is a film that you could definitely say is more frothy and light than the Defiant Ones, manages to win here. Yes. What do we think? Why does Gigi... First of all, I just want to establish Gigi is nominated for 9 Academy Awards, and it wins all 9 of them.
Yep.
At the time, it became the winningest film in Academy history, which is a thing. So what are your thoughts, first of all, on Gigi, but also just the fact that it ends up winning?
Well, Gigi is a movie that I actually don't mind it as much as other people do. I don't really think it's that great of a film, but I know for a lot of people, they look at it as like it's one of the worst movies ever and it's a terrible Best Picture winner. I don't really have that perspective. I think it's just mostly fine. I should say that I'm also not a huge fan of musicals from this era. They're just a little bit too glossy for me, just as a personal taste. And Gigi is definitely in that kind of area. And there's also some like weird things in the story about this older dude and this younger woman that just is very kind of gross to watch.
Yep.
But I don't know. I don't really hate the movie as much. And maybe it's just because the first time I saw it, I had very low expectations, and it's just sort of like kind of there for me. I think all the songs are just really forgettable. I think that's really like the biggest problem I have with it is, it doesn't really stick around for me. But at the time that this movie came out, it was a huge moneymaker. And I think it was the highest grossing film that MGM had. So at that time, especially with the Oscars, and you can make an argument today, money still is a very big factor in terms of how well you do, and considering how gigantic of a success that was, and that it left people with this very light and happy feeling as they left the theater, it seemed like that was an inevitable conclusion that it was probably going to win Best Picture.
Yeah. So I guess I can say that I'm one of those people who is not a fan of Gigi. I'm really not.
And I can understand it.
Yeah. It's gross from the beginning. I mean, we literally kind of open the film with an old man saying, "Thank heavens for little girls." Quite a tone establishing moment there.
Yeah, that's rough.
Yeah, not great. But oddly enough, that has become the most memorable song from the film, which is not a good thing, I would argue. I really just feel like it is kind of just a knockoff of My Fair Lady, and it's from the same team that did that on Broadway, and just is kind of inferior in every way to My Fair Lady. I mean, I'm not really that charmed by any of the performances. I think Leslie Caron has her moments to her, but again, I just feel like I never really got into what the story was trying to say, and I don't know, it just didn't really work for me. And also, there's been a lot made about sort of the visual aspect of Gigi, and it wins cinematography, and it has the production design and the costume design and all of that, which I understand, but at the same time, watching it, I almost found it to be sort of garish and excessive in terms of those technical elements. Having said all of that, I understand why it won Best Picture, because it was sort of one of the MGM musicals that really was sort of a throwback to that sort of style, as that was sort of going out of favor slightly with the studio system. And so I think it just was one of these things that is one of the things Hollywood did best at the time, and was basically good enough that people were charmed by it, and I guess they found some of the music good. Again, I didn't really get a lot out of it either, so it's one of these things where I understand intellectually why it ends up winning, especially in a field that is featuring films that are quite challenging in terms of their social and relationship dynamics that are happening within them. I think Gigi might be like a nice sort of replete from all of the heavy drama stuff happening in all these other films. So for all of those reasons, it sort of makes sense, but also I do think it is one of the worst Best Picture winners, personally.
Yeah, I mean, it's not really a movie I'm going to sit up and defend a lot. I don't really think it's that great of a film. And I think maybe just the fact that I did go in with very, very low expectations that it ended up helping me a little bit. But it's certainly not anything that I would ever feel the need to watch again. I think you're right that the visuals are intentionally like very over the top, and I think it kind of works for it. You know, I can understand if it's not really your thing. The performances aren't really either anything to write home about. I think the only reason why I even feel like Louis Jourdan is a little bit intriguing is probably just because 25 years later he was in a Bond film. I think that's the only reason why I probably even remember him in this movie. So yeah, it's not a movie that I think is really all that successful, but I think that for what it is trying to be, at least, which is a big, lavish Hollywood musical, I've seen plenty worse than Gigi. I think I can at least say that about it. I think that it's a movie that has an idea to want to be big and lavish and entertain you. It doesn't always do it for me, but I get kind of what it's going for, and for that, I'm just sort of like, okay, I mostly just like find Gigi to be forgettable, honestly.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I just watched it a few days ago, and I've pretty much forgotten all of the sort of melody aspects to it, and I don't know. Yeah, it just doesn't really last with you. It just feels like kind of a trifle. And
yeah,
I don't know if that's the kind of film that should be winning Best Picture, but anyone...
Well, there's a lot of them.
Yeah, I know, but Everyone has a different criteria for Best Picture, and it doesn't always have to go to the very important social weighty film every year. But in this case, I kind of would have preferred any other of these nominees.
Yeah, I mean, it's also funny. You talk about the just going back with that music being so forgettable. I watched the movie recently, and when it was over, I knew that there was a song in here that won the Oscar, but I couldn't remember what it was.
Yeah.
And when I looked it up, and it's like, oh, it was that song, like the song that's like just so just morosely sung and is supposed to be very upbeat and joyful, but just sounds so like down. And I was just shocked that that was the song that won.
It's very languid. Yes, it's a slog. Yes, I agree. I can't remember the melody to it.
No,
I just remember it being very drawn out as he's walking down the street, and that's it.
Yeah, I mean, as much as we kind of feel gross about little girls, at least it is memorable in the film. Like, at least that would have made sense as a memorable Oscar-winning song.
Sure. Fair enough. Moving on. We got a few questions about the Defiant Ones and Gigi that I want to get to. We got one for the Defiant Ones, and this was from our friend Brandon Stanwyck, who said, "How shook were you when Cara Williams revealed her sneaky deviousness?" So how shook were you, Josh?
Well, I mean, a little bit,
a little shook.
As we said, you definitely get the sense that there's something kind of sinister happening beneath the surface there, and that is credit to her performance. I think that she is really good in it. I will also admit, like, that moment when she just lets down her hair is oddly, like, satisfying. It's very strange, but it really works for the moment in the movie. But we also, as we said, it kind of is a development that maybe doesn't really fit with where the movie was before that part. So it definitely has the effect of taking you by surprise a little bit, but it isn't really congruent with the rest of the film.
Yeah. I will say I was slightly surprised at sort of her calculating nature in that regard, but also I just had a feeling, just knowing that she was nominated for an Oscar for this, feeling like she hadn't really done much of anything up to that point. I just really felt like, okay, there's got to be more to this, and lo and behold, yeah. So, slightly shook. To answer that.
Yeah.
This is from H3, who said, "Does Gigi winning rank among the worst Best Picture Oscar wins alongside Crash, Green Book, etc.? I mean, I like Gigi, but Best Picture? And to win with so many, 9 Oscars? Insane. It's also crazy because I'm not sure it would make the top 20 movie musicals list." Well.
Yeah, I mean, as I've said, I don't hate Gigi. I would definitely say it's probably on the lower end of Best Picture winners, but honestly, I don't even think it's the worst Best Picture winner this decade of the 50s. So
interesting.
I think there are a couple others actually that are far worse than Gigi. So
fair.
I mean, it's not great, but I think in the entire, all the years of Best Picture winners, I think that there are other ones that are far worse than this one is, and I think it also helps, at least maybe for me, that it's competition I'm not that enthused about either. So it really isn't even like it beat an all-timer for me. So
that's fair.
It's not a great Best Picture winner, but I would say it's far from the worst.
Well, it's probably in my bottom 10 as of now. I haven't seen every Best Picture winner. I haven't seen some of the super early ones. Like, I know people just definitely don't like a movie like Cimarron, things like that.
Yeah, that was pretty bad.
Yeah. So I think there's probably going to be worse ones as I go further back into Oscar history. I'll just put it that way.
Like I said, you might even get some in this decade.
Looking forward to that. This was from Fritz and the Oscars, who said, "Why did no cast member of Gigi get an acting nomination?" An excellent question for a film that completely sweeps.
Yeah, which is sort of funny because The other two movies that I can think of in this kind of funny coincidence that also were big sweepers were Last Emperor and Return of the King, which also didn't have acting nominations, which is kind of weird.
Yes, that is quite interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Hmm.
I mean, the simple answer would be that nobody in the movie deserves a nomination.
No
That
one
none
was
of them.
good enough.
Yeah, I mean that'd be the simple answer. Outside of that, I guess it's just that the other movies were a stronger showcase for their performances, and I think that Gigi was a movie that you walk out of and probably think about the technical side of it and all of that, but yeah, the performances just really don't attach themselves to you that much. Yeah, I mean, the only one that I'm actually maybe a little bit surprised didn't get nominated was is it Maurice Chevalier?
Yeah.
I am actually a little shocked that he didn't get nominated. He seems like somebody that would be tailor made to get a nomination, but
Hmm.
I'm not upset about it either.
Yeah. I honestly think looking at all of the nominees from this year that there are so many performances that have so much more weight to them and are such juicier roles overall that I really feel like there's just no real person of that cast, and including Gigi herself, Leslie Caron, could have really snuck in here.
Yeah,
There's just like I was saying earlier, there's a lot of like super interesting social and relationship kind of performances in here, lots of interesting interplay between a lot of characters in some of these other films that it and as far as Gigi, yeah, it's just the technicals and that's really it for me. So yeah, I guess it sort of makes sense, but also it is kind of odd that Gigi, as well as The Last Emperor and Return of the King, all have this weird anomaly to them that the acting branch was just like, eh.
yeah, it is a very weird thing that a movie that would be loved so much and showered with so many awards that none of that would have come to even like a random acting nomination from it.
Yeah. Even like a Hermione Gringotts might have been an interesting Gingolds, excuse me, would have been an interesting nomination. Let's see. This was from Mark Lamb, who says, I am a Gigi supporter. I know I'm in the minority and I understand the controversy. One thing I hope can be agreed upon is the Lerner and Lowe score, which is stellar, and the titular Oscar-winning song is wonderful. Can we all agree on that, Josh?
Oh, well. Well, I don't know if you just heard us just trash talk all the music and the songs. I'm sorry, but I find most of it to be very forgettable. In fact, the only reason why I think I even know just really one song outside of Little Girls is the Champagne one. And the only reason why I know that is because back in the day, I just remember that TCM used to run this promo about widescreen and the horrors of pan and scan, and they used that clip. It's the only reason why I know that song.
There you go. This is from another Mark Brinkerhoff, who said, is Gigi the first, and aside from The Return of the King, only Best Picture winner to win every Oscar for which it was nominated? Because that's a remarkable achievement for a film that is generally so unloved today. Well, we talked about The Last Emperor is another one.
Yeah.
It has also happened before Gigi. It did happen with It Happened One Night.
Yeah, I was going to mention but that's the only other one I can think of.
As well as Grand Hotel, which was only nominated for Best Picture. And won
it was
Best
really
Picture.
easy for that one to happen.
So, check. And I believe Wings as well maybe did that too, but I'm not positive on that. So, it's happened, but it is extremely rare. And I don't know if it'll even happen again, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, no, I don't think it's ever going to happen again.
Yeah. So, unless we have any other thoughts on the two of these films, let's get into some of these other Best Picture nominees, shall we?
Yes, let's.
Okay, so I want to start with Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. So this is a wonderful Tennessee Williams adaptation of a play. It has Paul Newman, Elizabeth Taylor, sexy stars of the day, as well as Burl Ives in a really interesting performance as Big Daddy. And by the way, I cannot get over how many times in that film/play, they say Big Daddy.
Yeah.
It is just, my God.
Yep, it's wonderful.
Yeah. So by the way, for anyone who hasn't seen it or wants to see it again, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof is on Netflix right now. So a rare older film that is on Netflix. So just throwing that out there.
Yeah.
So what do you think of Cat on a Hot Tin Roof?
I think it's just excellent and amazing. I don't think it's a perfect movie, and a lot of that has to do with the kind of differences in adaptation, obviously, from the source material. But to me, and I don't know how you feel, but I feel like it is the clear best of this group of Best Picture nominees. I think that it is the one that I find the most interesting to watch. It's the one that I would just, given the opportunity, would watch again and have no hesitation in doing so. These performances are so good, and I just really, really do enjoy this film. It's not as good as some other Tennessee Williams adaptations, but I think it's really solid, and it's so fun to watch.
Yeah, it's really fun to watch the interplay, and kind of Paul Newman just being so agitated a lot of the time is kind of fun, and Elizabeth Taylor really making a meal out of her big monologues.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, pretty much the same thing with Burl Ives as well. I do gravitate towards some of these sorts of very theatrical kinds of films, adaptations of plays. It's in certain ways is a bit reminiscent of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. Not just for the Elizabeth Taylor, but just for the dramatic points that they go to with relationships and stuff like that. Really, really good. I agree. It's one of the absolute best in this lineup. I think for me it would be between that and the Defiant Ones as far as which one I would pick, but I definitely would lean towards what Cat on a Hot Tin Roof is doing, even though it does feel like a play. You know, it's all kind of in the one place. It still makes the most of kind of the area around it, so I think it's very well directed.
Oh yeah, and it really is a movie that just kind of just, I think, grabs you just immediately, and you're just so transfixed by everything that's going on. And it's also, I still find surprising that Burl Ives did not get nominated for this movie. He won an Oscar this year, but it was not for this movie, and I often have trouble remembering that his Oscar, even though it came during this year, did not come for this movie, which would have just made a lot more sense to me.
Well, what an excellent lead-in to one of our questions we got, because this was from Joe Gouveia, who said, why did the Academy reward Burl Ives for The Big Country and not Cat on a Hot Tin Roof? Well, there's a relatively clear answer to this, and that is that they campaigned Burl Ives in Best Actor.
Oh, wow. I actually did not know that. That is bizarre.
Yep. And I do think if he was properly in supporting actor, where I think he belongs, even though it is a very grandiose role with a lot of screen time in some regards, it is just, for me, the classic kind of supporting actor winner. And yeah, if you look at it and you don't know kind of the context of, like, how did Burl Ives not get nominated for such an incredible, visceral performance in a film that was nominated for Best Picture? I think it's just technicalities is what it comes down to.
And I guess, you know, I admit I did not get a chance to see The Big Country, but my impression of watching clips and trailers of it is that he does have a much smaller role in that film.
Yes,
and I would imagine that, especially if you're campaigning and trying to not get in the way of another performance that is, I guess, more clearly a supporting role, that's what you want to do. But it is a shame, because it really does feel like, his name should be attached to the movie that was nominated for many more Oscars, including Best Picture.
Right. Speaking of acting, another friend, Daniel B., asked us, are you surprised Liz Taylor did not win the Oscar for Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, given its iconic status?
I mean, it's iconic now, and she's great in it, and I wouldn't have minded her winning. We might talk about who did win, and I also think that was a very compelling argument for for her as well. And I think that it was just kind of coming down to two performances that had a lot of screen presence to them, but one of them doing kind of a little bit more theatrics, if you could even imagine that, to kind of capture those votes.
Mm-hmm. Honestly, I'm not surprised that she doesn't end up winning here, because we should also provide some more context for what was happening this year in the personal lives, because that can come into play at times.
Especially for Elizabeth Taylor.
Well, yes, exactly. Very much so. Kind of the epitome of that.
Yeah.
So her husband dies, and ultimately she ends up with Eddie Fisher, who was married to Debbie Reynolds at the time. This is all happening in 1958. So she goes off with Eddie Fisher. They have their fun, and obviously they eventually get together and marry. And there's a lot of press about Elizabeth in terms of her being kind of the homewrecker. And I really genuinely think that the public persona stuff really ended up hurting her chances overall.
Yeah, I can certainly see that. And as we've said, her public persona was something that just constantly followed her and was mentioned in her narratives for the Oscar countless times. So, and I think of all of her many public relationships, the death of Michael Todd and then going into the relationship with Eddie Fisher is probably the one that most people are aware of, and how controversial that was and how much attention that put on her. I think definitely contributed to a narrative to not want to give her an award.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you saw the quote that I tweeted about today.
Oh, no, I don't think I did.
But it's a really very juicy passage from Inside Oscar where they talk about this. I'm just going to read this because it's glorious. It says, Elizabeth Taylor was no longer the widow Todd to journalists, but the woman you love to hate. Mike Connolly reported that Taylor threw a private soiree for Fisher and herself in October that she dubbed her "You Can All Go to Hell" party. The National Association of Theater Owners had planned to name Taylor their Star of the Year, but changed their minds, explaining, "The movie industry is at the mercy of public opinion, and to award Miss Taylor the honor at a time like this is out of the question."
Wow.
I mean, what an icon.
That is always something you could say. Yeah.
But also you can see why it would lead to some people not wanting to vote for her. That's always fun. Anyway, this is from Jackson DeStefano, who said, "Do you ever feel like a cat on a hot tin roof?"
I mean, when I'm watching Paul Newman in this film, certainly.
Amen to that. Yeah, he is looking mighty fine in this.
Oh my God, he really. I mean, it really cannot be understated, like just how hot he is in this movie. But
it's offensive.
Yes. Oh.
Yeah. But I do want to get into something a little more controversy with Tennessee Williams and how he felt about this adaptation, because the film takes out pretty much all of the gay undertones or overtones of the original play, and that is a very major component to the strained relationship between Paul Newman and Elizabeth Taylor. And so I definitely would have been intrigued to see how Paul Newman would have played with that. And I do think he is definitely hinting towards kind of harboring that secret. But also they never outright say that by any means.
No. And wasn't Paul Newman also kind of upset about that? I thought I remember hearing something that
he was.
Yeah.
So Tennessee Williams said, "This movie will set the industry back 50 years. Go home."
Oh, no. So. I mean, and I've heard arguments from people saying that the fact that it isn't explicitly said makes the movie more interesting, that it makes you kind of hunt for the subtext and it flavors the movie more. But I also think that the movie shouldn't make you hunt for it that hard. Yeah. And it seems like, and it almost does it to the point where it's doing everything it can not to say it.
Yeah.
And it's almost like, okay, well, now we're already thinking it, even though you're trying very hard for us kind of not to think about it. So why not just say it? It's almost more frustrating, even more frustrating now, because we all know what the subtext is, and now it's not even subtext anymore. Like, just say it.
Yeah. This feels like pillow talk, where they have Rock Hudson being, like, making jokes about in and out of the closet.
Yeah.
Which is more overt, but still, just say the damn thing, okay?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But definitely would recommend that from this lineup, and feels like probably the one that has stood the test of time, I guess, from this lineup.
I would certainly say so. Like I said, it is the one movie from this lineup that I would probably, like, if given the opportunity, would pick that one to watch again.
Yeah, absolutely. And you get more out of it too. Yeah. Leaves you with a lot to think about. Let's talk about Auntie Mame. So this is quite a fabulous picture. And this is another kind of theatrical film in some ways. Kind of about this orphan who goes off to live with his very free-spirited aunt, the titular Auntie Mame. And fun stuff is happening all around. It's kind of all about the lavish lifestyle that she leads and all the highs and the lows, and it's all pretty much summed up by the quote she says in the film, which is, "Life is a banquet and most poor suckers are starving to death."
Yeah, it is
thoughts?
It's a pretty, like, charming movie. I wasn't that taken with it, honestly. It's very episodic, and it's like these chapters in this woman's life, and I kind of feel like at a certain point, I sort of get it, And it's also it's a long movie.
It's long.
It's a very long movie, and I think Rosalind Russell's really good in it. I think that her performance really helps to guide you through a lot of this film, even when the story really isn't pulling me in so much. And I think that without her, the whole thing would just kind of fall apart for me. So I'm not a big fan of the movie in general, but I do think Rosalind Russell is pretty spectacular in it.
Yeah. I feel like there is a gay sensibility to this film.
Oh, yes.
That I find kind of delightful at the same time, even though it's not perfect. I just kind of find it sort of fun in, like, a wish fulfillment kind of way, of just like this boy who goes off to live with his very fabulous aunt who just, is like an alcoholic, and she has all these men around, and it's just, there's something to that. She has these
yeah.
costumes.
I think that if it was just a tad shorter, I would have been more into it.
And I do love all of her schemes, especially at the end, I must say. But ultimately, it does seem slightly forgotten, even though I do think that Rosalind Russell is excellent in this, and it's sad that she never wound up winning a competitive Oscar. This was her 4th nomination, and that was it. So this feels like a role that kind of should have won someone an Oscar, but it just didn't fall that way.
I would be shocked if she wasn't the runner-up in this category.
Yeah, for sure. Let's see. Well, that's a visual question, but I'm going to say Faye Dunaway's Salad Boy said, "How did Auntie Mame not get even nominated, let alone win Best Costumes for this hat alone?" Which you can just picture the hat.
She's got multiple hats.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very
whatever one you're thinking of now.
Yeah, I mean, whichever one is being mentioned, yeah.
It should be in costumes, and it's ridiculous that it isn't, because she gets to wear some extravagant shit in that, so it's fun.
Yeah, it should definitely have been nominated for costumes.
All right, let's move on to Separate Tables. Speaking of theatrical, once again.
Yeah.
Because this is based on a play. And speaking of an adaptation that is omitting some gay undertones, actually. Yeah. Because it's not quite as egregious as what Cat on a Hot Tin Roof did, because the playwright of Separate Tables, don't remember his name, but basically he said that he did have, his name is Terrence Rattigan, great name. He said that he originally had one of the main characters being gay and being caught as kind of an early draft for the character of David Niven. But he ended up changing it to make the audience more comfortable.
Oh,
and
that's funny.
in the process,
yeah,
made this character into a sexual abuser. So
yeah. Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
So we should explain Separate Tables is basically just kind of this sort of not episodic, but just all over the place kind of stories of several people who are at this hotel and they're dining at the separate tables. Drama ensues from that. Any thoughts on this one?
This is another one that I think overall is just sort of fine. I think everybody in the cast is doing a decent job with it, but there is something about the idea that like the two sort of protagonists of this story that we're asked to really care about are a like sexual deviant essentially and like this a domestic abuser, and that feels very I mean I get it that it was 1958 and it was the time, but man, to know that like we are supposed to find those characters to be wholly sympathetic is just a very, very odd feeling to sit with while you're watching the film.
Yeah, and the way the film ends is another case of kind of everything is forgiven, even though I don't know if we should be doing that.
No, because neither of those characters has really taken a great amount of responsibility. Like even
not at all.
No, like
they slightly feel isolated and uncomfortable. Okay.
Yeah, I mean it's very. I really didn't like that aspect of it, and it really kind of ended the movie on a very sour note.
I know, exactly. Yeah, typically I would definitely enjoy kind of a character drama like this that is, again, quite theatrical, but this is kind of a film that, once again, just didn't really rub me right. So let's talk about this David Niven performance, though, because he wins Best Actor. He is indeed one of the shortest performances to win Best Actor. I don't know how close he is with Anthony Hopkins, but I think it's very short. And the point is that why is he in Best Actor?
I really don't know. It does seem to me like if you were going to pick anybody from this cast to campaign for that category, I'm shocked that they didn't say Burt Lancaster. He feels more like a lead to me in this film, and
he's definitely more of a lead for sure.
Yeah, I don't really know why David Niven is in this category. I get it that, you know, maybe he is the one that has like the most dramatic points in the story, and that, you know, the movie ends with him as being the focal point, but I don't really feel like he comes across as a lead actor in this film. It just seems very strange that he ended up not only getting nominated for this award, but winning it too.
Yeah. To be honest, I can't really explain this win other than general goodwill towards David Niven. Yeah, so I just looked up, and this was from a very great resource by a man named Matthew Stewart, who had a website called Screen Time Central. Has a website called Screen Time Central, and David Niven is in fact the actor with the least amount of screen time to win Best Actor ever. Just beating Anthony Hopkins by a hair. And yeah, I just don't really get it. I wish I had a concrete answer to it, but I just think sometimes things work out in a way that he had the right combination of the other nominees that year, and they didn't know where else to turn.
Yeah, and I mean, the movie was very popular. He was popular. He hosted the Oscars that year, so people knew who he was. And I guess, as you said, the general goodwill for him, and that probably paid off, because I really do not understand why you would give him a lead actor Oscar for this role.
Yeah. Well, this was from Gordon at Mark Wahlberg, who said Niven is the shortest performance to win Best Actor to date. Why do you think he was placed in lead rather than supporting? I will just say, going back to what I've been talking about quite a bit over the past sort of decade of film, is that there were certainly a lot of feelings within the Academy as far as stars being in supporting, where there was some uncomfortable aspects about, like, those categories should be for up-and-comers and character actors rather than people who have been leading movies, like he was in My Man Godfrey, for example. And so, I don't know. I think it might just be placement on the title cards or ego or some combination of everything.
Yeah, that is true that back then there was very much the stigma that a star shouldn't win a supporting Oscar, and that has obviously not really mattered so much today, but
Not at
you're
all.
right. Back then it was kind of a thing that if you were a star, you got a lead Oscar for your troubles.
Yep. And speaking to what we've been talking about, basically, Mark Lamb said, David Niven, sort of supporting, no. Yes.
Yeah, I think he is 100% supporting, personally.
Burt Lancaster, more of the lead in the ensemble. By the way, what a depressing movie. Agreed.
Yeah, not really an uplifting one, that's for sure. And it definitely wants you to know how serious it is,
Yes, exactly. We should also mention it wins another acting prize, supporting actress, for Wendy Hiller. How about that?
Yeah, it's fine in it. I don't really find her to be, like, exceptional at all, but she doesn't want to make me gouge my eyes out, so that's something
That's a plus.
for her.
Yeah, another great quote from Inside Oscar. She doesn't understand why she won an Oscar for this. And she had no issues saying it to the press. So she said, all you could see of me in the picture was the back of my head. Unless they give some award for acting with one's back to the camera, I don't see how I could have won. They cut my 2 best scenes and they gave one to Rita Hayworth.
Oh. Oh, I love it.
Yeah, and she goes on to say, never mind the honor, though I'm sure it's very nice of them. I hope this award means cash. Hard cash. I want lots of lovely offers to go filming in Hollywood, preferably in the winter, so I can avoid all the horrid cold over here, where she's in London. So...
I love those old quotes where people just didn't care.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I love this era.
Oh, so great.
Yeah. All right. So, like we've been saying, kind of a mixed bag as far as a Best Picture lineup. And I do feel like the Academy didn't really know where to go, so they kind of defaulted to Gigi among this group. But I don't know. Let's move on to our Should Have Been a Contender segment. This is where we talk about other films not nominated for Best Picture and any old film that came out in 1958. All right, so Josh, what's at the top of your list here to talk about?
Well, one thing that I actually do want to mention is a film that I'm sure came very close to getting a Best Picture nomination because it showed up in many categories that kind of indicate that, and that is I Want to Live.
Exclamation point.
Yes, you can't forget the exclamation point.
Yes.
Which seems like it should have been one on Anti-Main, but, that's neither here nor there.
Yeah, it should have.
But yeah, I Want to Live, it got nominated for director and actress and writing and editing, and it just seems like it was probably in that 6th spot to get nominated for Best Picture. And I gotta say, I really love this movie. I had not seen it previously. I watched it very recently, and it is very melodramatic, but it is kind of the melodrama that I love, and it's a melodrama that has this very fierce and fascinating performance from Susan Hayward in the lead, and I just was so into this movie. And like I said, it definitely has a tone going for it that can be rather off-putting, but I think that Robert Wise is such a great filmmaker, and he was somebody who was able to really go into so many different genres and do them effectively. And I really like how he manages to actually capture this really great tonal shift that the movie goes through that feels very energetic and fast-paced in the beginning and then kind of slows down as you get to the ending. And by the time you get to the very end of the movie, it's like so stark but very effective. And I really, really do love the film.
Yeah. It really struck me watching it how modern it felt in some ways. Like, even when they were showing, like, the news footage of what was going on, that felt so modern to me.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, it basically was like going to like the entertainment is news kind of thing that we deal with
exactly.
today.
Exactly. Yeah. Just to explain sort of the plot for those who have no idea what we're talking about,
Yes.
it's about a real life case of this prostitute and criminal perjurer, Barbara Graham, who was convicted and went to the gas chamber. And this is all based on real life. All the while, she's claiming her innocence. People are working to prove her innocence, but she is ultimately executed. And that is a well-known case, so that's not spoiling anything. That's just what happened.
Yeah.
But yes, Susan Hayward in this is such a tour de force, honestly. I was really struck by especially the arc that her character takes as well, because she's so like confident and charismatic in the beginning, and you could definitely see where she could get into trouble and kind of flirt and do all this stuff, and even she's doing that even when she's in prison as well. But then as time goes on and she's realizing that her hope of getting out and being innocent is running out, you really see the worry on her face, and it's just all of her vitality feels like it's drained by the end of it. And it's such a powerful arc that I really, looking at that best actress race, I can't see how you can choose anyone else, even with all those great performances.
Yeah, she just really commits to that arc that she's going through. And I do admit that towards the end of the film, it does kind of get almost to the point of parody, where it's like these last minute calls and stays of execution. Like,
Sure,
it,
yeah.
it gets a little ridiculous at that point, and I don't know how much of that is sort of creative license that they're going with. But she still handles it so well, and you're right that even given that very strong lineup, it is really difficult to imagine anybody else winning that award. She definitely deserved it, in my opinion.
Definitely. And, playing a real life person, no one else had that in this lineup, so
Yeah,
always
that
helps.
is true. Yep.
Another question from Mark Lamb said, Best Actress, very competitive. What a great lineup. I think Deborah Carr gave her finest performance here, but a case could be made for others. Who do you think was the runner-up? So to remind people, the other nominees were Deborah Carr in Separate Tables, Shirley MacLaine in Some Came Running, Rosalind Russell in Auntie Mame, and Elizabeth Taylor in Cat on a Hot Tin Roof.
Well, I can't speak for Shirley MacLaine because I unfortunately did not get a chance to see Some Came Running, but I kind of feel like Rosalind Russell was probably the runner-up, given that she was on multiple nominations and that movie just seemed to be like a really good vehicle for her. It's a really good showcase for her as a performer. She doesn't have the baggage that somebody like Elizabeth Taylor had, and I feel like if I Want to Live was not a factor, it probably would have been her.
For sure. Yeah, I definitely think Rosalind Russell is number 2 here, because it really does feel like such a classic sort of grand dame, best actress sort of winner that you would see all the time. So I think she won the Golden Globe too, so she was definitely up there. But another thing, lots of fascinating stuff happening this year behind the scenes. Another thing from Inside Oscar was about how she did not campaign. So she took the strategy that would later be perfected by Monique and let the performance speak for itself. Obviously, they didn't feel like it was enough, but I do think she came relatively close, I would guess, but I'm not sure.
Well,
Yeah.
didn't she also have a quote basically saying like when she saw I Want to Live, basically conceded that Susan Hayward's winning.
Yeah.
Like if I got to lose to anybody, it's gonna be her, and I'm
Yeah.
gonna understand it.
Right. So it was an inevitability. Everyone knew it, I suppose.
Yeah.
So this was a really weird question, but this was from Kevin Clowder. He was quoting from the IMDb trivia page for I Want to Live, and it says, Virginia Vincent, who portrayed Peg, at the very least deserved a nomination for the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress. When Vincent asked her agent why he wasn't getting her nominated, he responded, "Not this time." Her response to her agent was right on the money. If not now, when? So that entire paragraph is an IMDb trivia thing.
Yeah, I actually remember reading that and thinking, why is this here? But IMDb trivia has very weird entries. I actually remembered reading the one for Auntie Mame, and the very last bit of trivia on the Auntie Mame page is Mame and Vera were the 1950s version of Absolutely Fabulous.
Oh, is that a fact?
Yes, as a bit of trivia for the movie.
Yes. Wow. Didn't know that. Thanks.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah,
So
IMDb
full of
trivia
nuggets.
is weird.
Yeah, but that's why we love it.
But do we agree with the sentiment that Virginia Vincent, who portrayed Peg, should have gotten a supporting actress nomination for I Want to Live?
I think that she's very good in the film. Yeah, sure, why not?
I'll say fine.
Yeah.
I wouldn't give her a win by any means, but sure.
Yeah.
All right. So I think we should definitely talk about the film from this year that pretty much has stood the test of time more than anything else and is on many best of all time lists, and that is Vertigo.
Yeah. Why don't you take the lead on Vertigo?
Okay, then.
Because I'm gonna say something that might not be popular. So I'm
Controversial?
gonna let you go first.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, I happen to love Vertigo, and I think it is one of his masterpieces. Alfred Hitchcock, of course, I'm talking about. Just really interesting, well-placed twists, and what really struck me watching it again, I've seen it multiple times now, for me it never gets old, is it really struck me how this really felt like this is about two very destructive people who want certain things in their relationship between each other, but they can just not get to that point. And it's so kind of devastating to watch these two who, he wants her to be this image of the person that has, he thinks, passed away. And she just wants him to accept her and love her like she was before, like he did before. And it's a really kind of profoundly sad film by the end of it for me, even beyond some of the very flashy twists and really interesting dream sequences with Jimmy Stewart's head floating around. Yeah, it really struck me kind of how deep the emotional toll I felt by the end of it on this go around. But I guess you have a different take, so what do you say?
Yeah, and I know that Vertigo is looked at as one of his masterpieces, and I get it. I do. There are certainly aspects to Vertigo that I do admire, and I think a lot of that comes down to obviously the technical expertise in it. There are images in that film that are absolutely stunning and gorgeous, and the music is great. There's a lot of things that I do admire about it. But I will also admit that for whatever reason, this story just never really sticks with me a whole lot. And I get why it has so much resonance for other people, but it just doesn't really for me. And to be honest with you, and maybe this is a bit unfair to the movie, but I think also just kind of knowing Hitchcock, I don't ever really find those scenes with Jimmy Stewart and Kim Novak to be this interesting dynamic. I just sort of see it as a personification of the director and how controlling he is, and I get kind of grossed out by it, to be honest with you.
Interesting.
That scene in the store when he's going through all the motions about all the stuff that she has to try on and fix her hair. It's just it's hard for me to, I know that you are supposed to separate art from artist, but it's really difficult for me to watch that scene and just not think about Hitchcock doing that to basically all of his actresses. And I get a little grossed out by that. So it's a fine movie. I get why people love it, but if I'm going to be completely honest with you, if you ask me what is my favorite Alfred Hitchcock film or name some of my favorite ones, I would name maybe 6 or 7 before I would even think about mentioning Vertigo.
Well, he's made a lot of great movies, so.
And that's the beautiful thing about Alfred Hitchcock is that you really don't have any short supply of
Yeah.
great movies that he's made. And even though Vertigo really isn't one that I necessarily get into as much as other people do, there's so many other films from him that I love. And there are aspects about Vertigo that I do appreciate. Like I said, the cinematography, the music, like there are very striking things about the movie. Just as a whole, it doesn't really connect with me a ton, but I get why it does for so many other people, and I just sort of I leave it at that, and I just kind of just go back and watch Psycho again.
That's fair, and I definitely would say Psycho is right at the top for me, but Vertigo is right there. I think the Kim Novak performance, I know, is people kind of feel all over the place about what she's doing in the film, but I just think the difference in the performance she's giving for the first 2/3 of the film and how different it is from the last third is really striking acting. And some of that has to do with like makeup and stuff, but it just really feels like it's a whole other person. And so I kind of have a soft spot for that performance. And yeah, definitely agree. The music's great. The cinematography is great. And also, I don't know why I didn't notice this before, but the scene with the very like greenish aquamarine curtains, I saw the La La Land taking from that in that moment. I was like, oh
Yeah.
yeah. Yep. Anyway, that's Vertigo. I think it should have been nominated for a lot more than it was, but even the critical perception, I believe, was sort of mixed at the time. So
Yeah, and it wasn't a big money earner either. It didn't. It was obviously a very personal movie from Hitchcock, and it did not land in the way that I think he wanted to. And I mean, on that level, it is a shame, especially considering just how technically proficient it is. Even though I'm not a big fan of the movie, I can at least agree on that.
yeah,
That should have been recognized.
and it's only nominated for art direction and sound, which can't argue with those, but should have been a lot more for me, especially like score, for instance. Once again, we have a Bernard Herrmann score being overlooked unjustly.
Oh, yeah.
So do you have others here?
Yeah. I do have a few. These are movies that I don't think ever. No, I mean, I don't even think. I know they never came anywhere near the Oscars. I'm going to say that. But this is a year that has some movies that do mean a very good deal to me because they are kind of in the sci-fi, fantasy, horror genres, and movies from this era were like stuff that I really just devoured when I was younger. They were films that I used to watch with my parents on like Friday nights, and they really were like the stuff that helped me get into classic movies in particular. So a lot of films from this era I have a lot of reverence for, and one of those is The Fly, which of course was remade as a David Cronenberg movie, but this is the original, which, you know, has very dicey 1950s science behind it, but I still find it to be very fun and engaging. It sort of weirdly has this 1950s melodrama laid on top of this very out there science fiction storyline, and I find that to be really interesting. So it's a relic of its time, but I do really enjoy it, and it definitely has a lot of nostalgic value for me, certainly in that regard.
Very good. I haven't seen the original. Sadly, I've only seen the Jeff Goldblum masterpiece.
Yeah,
so,
which is better. I'm not going to lie. The remake is better. But the original movie, I think, given that it is a 1950s sci-fi movie, it's one that I have a lot of affection for. There's another movie from this era that's kind of in... It's not science fiction, it's more the fantasy realm, but there was a Sinbad movie released this year called The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, and this was another one growing up. My parents loved the Sinbad movies. This is one that I also really enjoyed. I used to watch it with them constantly, and it's a swashbuckler type of a movie, and normally I'm not very much into those, but this one I find has just a lot of fun elements to it, and I think a lot of that has to do with there's a genie in a lamp, so there's kind of an Aladdin connection I probably associated with that one. And again, it's not an Oscar movie at all. It's a very lighthearted frolic of, a fantasy movie, but it's another one that I really, really enjoyed watching. And whenever it's on TV, I can kind of just stop everything and just watch that.
Well, I want to talk about the foreign language film winner of this year, which is Mon Oncle, otherwise known as My Uncle. So this is sort of a satire on modern consumerism in France at the time, and it's directed by Jacques Tati. And
Okay.
it's one of these films that really doesn't really need to even have dialogue, but there's very light dialogue that is basically incidental to what's actually happening.
Oh, that's Jacques Tati for you.
Yes, right. But I would say that it's mildly enjoyable. That's
also Jacques Tati for
that
you.
sounds damning with faint praise, but it's not one that I was like super engaged with, but I did kind of find it interesting just as sort of an artifact of commenting on the very absurd sort of consumerism that was happening at the time, and sort of the struggle to just be a regular person in a time where there's a lot of social pressure, which was a big thing in the 50s for many countries at the time, particularly America. So kind of interesting there. Also, since we talked a little bit about it, I did watch The Big Country because I wanted to just see what this Burl Ives performance was. Another long one.
Yeah.
It's verging on 3 hours. And it's a William Wyler one, I think.
Yeah, I do think it was William Wyler.
So right before Ben-Hur. And so it's kind of a Hatfields and McCoys sort of a story of these warring families in the West, and it's got the wonderful Gregory Peck, who I love, and Gene Simmons from Elmer Gantry, and Charlton Heston. So it's a really big all-star cast, Technicolor epic Western extravaganza that I feel like even if you haven't seen it, you probably know what exactly the film is going to be.
Yeah. Now, have you seen Giant?
I will be talking about Giant very soon.
Okay, yeah,
So I'll
because
leave it at
I
that.
saw the trailer to The Big Country and like some clips from it, and I got vibes from that movie, which
Yes.
came out a couple years before The Big Country. So I didn't know if like maybe this was something kind of going for that similar vibe to it. It certainly
Yeah.
read that way from the little bit I did see.
I would say it's quite inspired by that, yes. But Burl Ives basically just plays this baron who, I mean, the cigar smoking sort of thing, and it's just again a very classic sort of supporting actor kind of performance of just this big guy who's very I don't know what the word is, just very gregarious, really. The leader of this family. And it's fine. It's not something that I would particularly recommend unless you're a big fan of Westerns, but it has some appeal to it, and it looks really spectacular. So, at least there's that.
Oh, well, you know what? Speaking of, I didn't know if you had more to say.
No, go ahead.
Sorry.
I'm done.
Well, I was just going to say that speaking of Charlton Heston, another movie that I just remembered that came out this year was Touch of Evil.
Yes, correct.
And yeah, that is another one that probably, maybe along with Vertigo, gets talked about as like one of the great movies that has stood up to the test of time from this year. And, there's problematic elements to that, mainly Charlton Heston playing a Mexican. That's not really great in the movie, but I still really love it as a great noir piece of filmmaking. And I think that it's still another one that's very fun and entertaining to watch. And I would say one of Orson Welles' best films.
Yes, and we did get this. Speaking of it, it's question from San Diego Cinerama about were Vertigo and A Touch of Evil basically eligible for this because the fact that they're not basically heavily rewarded is kind of bizarre, and I would agree. They were eligible. It just they both had somewhat of a mixed reception, I think.
Yeah, it's one of those cases where now there's so much reference for those films, but at the time that wasn't really there for them to carry them all the way to the Oscars.
Right. I just want to briefly touch on Some Came Running, which is another Vincent Minnelli film other than Gigi that came out this year. So big year for Vincent Minnelli.
Yeah.
excellent Shirley MacLaine performance. I have had such a great time watching these earlier Shirley MacLaine roles because she is such a spitfire, and she is everything that she continues to be all of these years later. Just as a very sort of out of control woman who is a little bit simple-minded but has a really good heart. So one of those kinds of roles. And it has Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin. Very cool movie, obviously, with those two involved. And is kind of just about this guy who comes back to his hometown, and he's this writer, and things have changed, relationships bubble up, all of that wonderful stuff. So really juicy sort of relationship drama there that I really enjoyed. And yeah, I would say that Best Actress lineup is pretty fantastic overall, having seen all of those performances. So.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen Some Came Running, unfortunately. I tried to, but I didn't quite at the time before our conversation. But even, like, I can assume that Shirley MacLaine gave a great performance. So obviously, knowing that assumption and then seeing the other four performances, yeah, that is an incredible lineup of actresses right there.
And this here she was basically just the ingenue kind of a role where people were talking about how, like, okay, this is a film that has the Rat Pack. It's got Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin, but really the real MVP hidden under all them is Shirley MacLaine. So that's really where she sort of got her start, and here we are all these years later.
Yeah, that's true. She deserves it.
Absolutely. So that's pretty much it for my top contenders. Did you have any others?
No, I think that's pretty much it. I find this year to be kind of not that inspiring. I think there's a couple in here that are really fascinating, but I kind of feel like even outside of the Oscars, the year overall is just sort of like kind of just okay to me.
Yeah, it's not one of the more inspiring group of films that I could have ended this era with, but at the same time, I do think it does have these little pockets of brilliance like we have every year, really, but there's no real bad year of film. There's always going to be a few classics hidden in there, and I do think that this, I mean, there's Vertigo, there is I Want to Live, I would say deserves to be even more heralded than it is, and Defiant Ones and Cat on a Hot Tin Roof I think are both great as well. So yeah, kind of a mixed bag, but still kind of fun at the same time.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So when we come back, we will be delivering our verdict as to whether we think Gigi deserved Best Picture or if the Defiant Ones should have taken it.
The nominated are, for the Best Motion Picture of the Year, Auntie Mame, Warner Brothers; Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, Avon Productions, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer; Lawrence Weingarten, producer; The Defiant Ones, Stanley Kramer, United Artists, Stanley Kramer, producer; Gigi, Arthur Freed, Productions, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, Arthur Freed, producer; Separate Tables, Clifton's Productions, United Artists, Harold Hecht, producer. Well, the winner are, again, Gigi!
And we're back. So now we'll be delivering our verdict as to whether we think Gigi deserved Best Picture or if the Defiant Ones should have taken it. Josh Parham, what is your verdict?
Well, I think this is going to be a fairly easy answer to come to. I think that between these two movies, The Defiant Ones is clearly the more interesting movie. It's the better made movie. It's the more compelling one. It succeeds on every level when put up against Gigi in particular. Yeah, and I even say that as somebody, again, that I don't hate Gigi, but it is a very, like, I think even the best thing you can say about it is that it is, like, very just forgettable and inconsequential, whereas The Defiant Ones has these towering performances and this great style of filmmaking and this intriguing concept. And I think that especially if you are comparing these two movies, there is, in my mind, no question that the Defiant Ones as a superior achievement and really should have been a more deserving winner over Gigi.
Yes. I totally co-sign all of that. Gigi is my number 5 of this Best Picture lineup, if I'm being perfectly honest. Even though we have some flaws within a lot of these Best Picture nominees, including the Defiant Ones, I do think that what the film is doing is artistically daring in some ways, even if it can be dated at times, seeing it all these years later. I do think it is... it leaves more of a lasting impact, certainly, than what Gigi does.
Mm-hmm.
So for that alone, I would definitely give it to it. But also, brilliant performances, really great cinematography, and it's 90 minutes. So, I mean, there's that. Would you give it to any others? We did talk about Cat on a Hot Tin Roof as a possibility here. So would that get your vote?
I think it probably would, and I do still really like the Defiant Ones, but I am just so drawn to Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, and it really is a movie that I think about a lot, even to this day. There's so many memorable moments in it, and the Defiant Ones has memorable moments too, but I really feel like Cat on a Hot Tin Roof is just that movie that continually pulls me back into wanting to discuss it and think about it and watch it, and I think that for that reason alone, it probably would get my vote of this lineup as the best picture of that group.
Yeah, I would pretty much agree. I'm definitely more drawn to Cat on a Hot Tin Roof and the themes that it's exploring. But for me, it really feels like it's those top two, the Cat on a Hot Tin Roof and the Defiant Ones, and then the others.
Yeah, then a steep drop off
yeah.
after that.
Yeah, I mean, I still enjoy Auntie Mame, which is it's a good number 3, but the other two, bye.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Josh, for joining me on this last episode of this season. This was a very excellent and lengthy and great chat, I think.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. It was an honor to be a part of the season finale, and I'm always grateful to be invited back to talk about movies and the Oscars with you.
Yeah, and we'll have to get you back in another 30 years to talk about 1929 or something.
Oh, I can't wait.
Yes. Okay, so tell the people where they can find more of you on the internet.
You can find me on Twitter at Josh Parham, and you can also find a lot of my work over on Next Best Picture.
Yeah, you're doing a lot of great stuff over there. And by the way,
thank you.
I read your piece on The Tingler.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Yes.
In another classic horror movie that came out in 1959, so it just celebrated its 60th anniversary, and it's another movie that I had a lot of reverence for. A lot of films from this era I have a lot of fond memories of.
Yeah, it sounds kind of cool, so I might check that out, actually.
I would highly recommend it, especially if you're a Vincent Price fan.
I am. He's delightful.
Oh, so good.
And you can find me at Kevin_Jacobson on Twitter as well as Instagram. And you can find the show at Oscar Runner Up. The show is everywhere you can find podcasts. And if you're on Apple Podcasts, please rate, review, and subscribe. Give a 5-star review to boost my ego. And if you like this and you want to hear more great Oscar content, you can subscribe on Patreon at patreon.com/andtherunnerup_is. And so, once again, thank you, Josh.
Oh, thank you.
And I will tell you all that I will be back on October 16th for 1957. I will enjoy this break, and I will bid you all adieu.